Hello everybody, today we are going to learn what are the various theories of attribution in today's lesson. The main objectives in this lesson are to understand theories of attribution. We will be learning what is Heider's common sense theory. We will also be learning what is Jones and Davis correspondent inference theory. I would like to start today's lesson with an example. You meet a very attractive person at a party. You would like to see him again or her again. So you ask, would you like to get together for a movie? Would you like to get together for a movie next week? Your dreams of a wonderful romance are shattered when the person answers, no sorry, I can't do it next week. Now, you are left wondering why they refused your invitation. Because they don't like you as much as you like them. Because are they currently in a serious relationship and they don't want to date anyone else? Or is it because they are also busy with other commitments that they have no spare time? The conclusion you reach will be important to your self-esteem. If you conclude that in fact they don't like you or they are involved in a serious relationship, the chances are lower that you will try to arrange another meeting with them. This simple example illustrates an important fact about social perception. Often we want to know more than simply how they are feeling right now. In addition, we want to know how and why they have said or done various things, and further what kind of a person they really are and what are lasting traits, interests, motives and goals they have. For instance, to mention just one of the countless possibilities, we want to know if other person are high or low in self-control, to what extent can they regulate their own actions effectively. If they are in high self-control, we tend to view them as trustworthy, while if they are low on the aspect of self-regulation, we may conclude that they are unpredictable and not someone we can rely on. Social psychologists believe that our interest in such questions stems in large part from our basic desire to understand cause and effect relationships in the social world. We do not simply want to know how others acted, that is something we can readily observe. We also want to understand why they do what they have done. This too because knowledge can help us to understand them better and also can help us to better predict their future actions. The process through which we can seek such information and draw inferences is known as attribution. More formally, attribution refers to our efforts to understand the causes behind others' behavior and on some occasions the causes behind our behavior too. Attribution theory. Attribution theory deals with how the social perceiver uses information to arrive at causal explanation for events. It examines what information is gathered and how it is combined to form a causal judgment. Attribution theory is concerned with how and why ordinary people explain events as they do. Attribution theory is that area of psychology that is concerned about explaining the world and determining the reason behind the cause of an event or behavior, asking why do people do what they do. It began with the work of Fritz Heider in 1958. Heider proposed that all individuals act as naive scientists when exploring and understanding their environment, both physically and socially. Individuals therefore work and act not just to make interpretations about the physical environment aspects, but also to understand the underlying causal aspects behind it. He argued that humans have two strong motives: the need to develop a logical and consistent understanding of the world, the need to have control over the environment. According to social psychologists, such tendency occurs as we want to know the cause and effect relationship in the social world. This helps us to predict how people will behave in the future. Therefore, attribution basically talks about the efforts we make to know the reason behind behavior of other individuals and some events, and the cause behind one's own behavior as well. Causal attribution is more likely to be made by individuals when something unpleasant or unexpected takes place, creating a requirement for greater predictability. Accurate knowledge of others' current moods or feelings can be useful in many ways. Yet, where social perception is concerned, this knowledge is often the only first step. In addition, we usually want to know more to understand others' lasting traits and to know the causes behind their behavior. Attribution is the process through which we seek to identify the causes of others' behavior and so gain knowledge of their stable traits and dispositions. Social psychologists have studied attribution for several decades, and their research has yielded many intriguing insights into this important process. Attribution is an aspect of social perception in which characteristic traits, intentions, abilities are inferred on the basis of observed behavior. To characterize other people in terms of certain traits, intentions or abilities requires us to make attributions or inferences about them. Because we do not have access to others' personal thoughts, motives or feelings of others, we make inferences about these traits based on their behavior we can observe. By making such attributions from certain behaviors, we can increase our ability to predict how a person might behave in the next context. There are two loci of attribution: internal attributions. These are nothing but the explanations based on stable characteristics such as attitudes, personality traits or ability. External attributions. These are based on situations such as stimuli in the environment like events of the day and rewards and punishments associated with certain acts. Theories of attribution. Heider's common sense theory. Fritz Heider is frequently referred to as the father of attribution theory. Heider discussed what he called as naive or common sense psychology. In his view, people were like amateur scientists trying to understand other people's behavior by piecing information until they arrived at a reasonable explanation or cause. Heider based his ideas on three principles. First principle: because we feel that our behavior is motivated rather than random, we look for the causes for other people's behavior in order to discover their motives. The search for causes does seem to pervade human thought, and it can be difficult to explain or comment on something without using causal language. Nowadays, we can witness the same phenomena in people's often highly emotional ascription of human motives to computer generated figures. People's pervasive need for causal explanation reveals itself the most powerfully in the way that almost all societies construct an origin myth and elaborate causal explanation for the origin and meaning of life that is often the centerpiece of religion. Second principle: because we construct causal theories in order to be able to predict and control the environment, we tend to look for stable and enduring properties of the world around us. We try to discover personality traits and enduring abilities in people or stable properties of situations that cause behavior. The third principle: in attributing causality for behavior, we distinguish between personal factors like personality or ability and environmental factors such as situations, social pressure. The former are examples of internal disposition and the latter are an example of external attribution. So, for example, it might be useful to know whether someone you meet at a party who seems aloof and distant is an aloof and distant person, or is acting like that because that person is not enjoying the party. Heider believed that because internal causes or intentions are hidden from us, we can only infer from their presence if there are no clear external causes. However, as we see later, people tend to be biased in preferring internal to external attributions even in the face of evidence or external causality. It seems that we readily attribute behavior to stable properties of people. Heider identified the major themes and provided the insight that forms the blueprint of all subsequent more formalized theories of attribution. One of Heider's most valuable contributions is a simple dichotomy. When trying to decide why people behave as they do, for example, why a father has just yelled at his daughter, we can make one of two attributions. One option is to make an internal attribution, deciding that the cause of father's behavior was something about him, his disposition, personality, attitudes or character. An explanation that assigns the causes of his behavior internally. For example, we might decide that the father has poor parenting skills or is an impatient person. Alternatively, we might also make an external attribution, deciding that something in the situation, not in the father's personality or attitudes, caused his behavior. If we conclude that he yelled because his daughter had just stepped into the street without looking, we would be making an external attribution for his behavior. Notice that our impression of the father will be very different depending upon the attribution we make. For this particular example, if we make an internal attribution, we will form a negative impression. If we make an external attribution, we will not learn much about the father. After all, most parents would have done the same thing if their child had just disobeyed them by stepping into the street. Quite a difference. This internal external attribution dichotomy plays a very important role even in the most intimate parts of our lives. Indeed, spouses in happy, satisfied marriages make very different attributions about their partners than spouses in troubled, distressed marriages. Satisfied spouses tend to make an internal attribution for their partner's positive behaviors. Example, she helped me because she is such a generous person, and external attributions for their partner's negative behaviors. Example, he said something mean because he is so stressed at work right now. In contrast, spouses in distressed marriages tend to display the opposite pattern. Their partner's positive behaviors are chalked up to external causes. For example, she helped me because she wanted to impress our friends, while negative behaviors are attributed to internal causes. Example, he said something mean because he is a self-centered jerk. When an intimate relationship becomes troubled, the second pattern of attributions about one's partner only makes the situation worse and can have dire consequences for the future relationship. Now, let us summarize Heider's theory. Interest in attribution process began with Fritz Heider's 1958 theory, which was concerned with how we attempt to understand the meaning of other people's behavior, particularly how we are identifying the causes of their actions. Heider was interested in knowing how people in everyday life figure out what causes what. He proposed two strong motives in all human beings: the need to form a coherent understanding of the world, the need to control the environment. One of the essentials for satisfying these motives is the ability to predict how others will behave. If we cannot predict how others will behave, we will perceive the world as a random, surprising and incoherent place. Similarly, to have a satisfying level of control over the environment, we must first be able to predict others' behavior. We see a person act and immediately reach conclusions that go beyond the measure of sensory information. Attribution is a three-step process through which we perceive others as causal agents. The three steps are perception of the action, judgment of the action, attribution of disposition. According to Fritz Heider, we produce attributions which are beliefs about causes of behavior based on two sources of information. The first is internal attributions based on something within the individual whose behavior is being observed, like their natural character. The second is external attributions based on something external to that individual, nothing to do with who they are specifically. It is the situation that they are in. Internal attributions are often referred to as dispositional attributions, while external attributions are called as situational attributions. In general, behavior can be caused by personal forces such as ability or effort, or by environment such as luck or difficulty of the task to be done. If an action is attributed to the personal forces, it will have a different meaning than if it is attributed to the environmental forces. According to Heider, people are like amateur scientists trying to understand other people's behavior by piecing information until they arrive at a reasonable cause. The correspondent inference theory describes the conditions under which we make dispositional attributes to behavior we perceive as intentional. Davis used the term correspondent inference to refer to an occasion when an observer infers that a person's behavior matches or corresponds with their personality. For example, that a friendly action is due to an underlying disposition to be friendly. People like to make correspondent inferences like attributing behavior to underlying disposition because A dispositional cause is a stable cause that makes people's behavior predictable and thus increases our own sense of control over our world. The theory of correspondent inference deals with the way we utilize information about other people's behavior as a basis for making an inference about the various traits they possess. Hence, the theory deals with how we make decisions based on overt actions of other individuals about how they possess certain traits or dispositions. The task is not as easy as it seems. Often, one behaves in a certain way not due to dispositions, but due to external factors. Socially desirable behavior is not clearly revealing of personal characteristics. We cope with such complications by focusing our attention on certain types of actions which are most likely to prove informative. To make a correspondent inference, we draw on 5 sources of information or cues. The first source, freely chosen behavior, is more indicative of disposition than is behavior that is clearly under the control of external threats or inducements or constraints. Second, behavior with effects that are relatively exclusive to that behavior rather than common to many behaviors, that is, behaviors with non-common effects tell us more about dispositions. People assume that others are aware of non-common effects and that the specific behavior was performed intentionally to produce the non-common effect. This tendency has been called as outcome bias. So, for example, if a person has to choose between behavior A and behavior B and both produce roughly the same effects, that is, no non-common effects or a very large number of different effects, that is, many non-common effects, the choice tells us little about the person's disposition. However, if the behaviors produce a small number of different effects, that is, a few non-common effects, example, behavior A produces only terror and behavior B produces only joy, then the choice does tell us something about the person's disposition. The third factor, socially desirable behavior, tells us little about a person's disposition because it is likely to be controlled by societal norms. However, socially undesirable behavior is generally counter normative and is thus a better basis for making a correspondent inference. Fourth factor, we make confident correspondent inferences about others' behavior that has important consequences for ourselves, that is, behavior that has hedonic relevance. Fifth factor, we make more confident correspondent inferences about others' behavior that seems to be directly intended to benefit or harm us. A behavior that is high in personalism. I will now be talking about some very important and famous experiments that have been conducted to verify the findings of correspondent inference theory. Experiments testing correspondent inference theory provide some support. Jones and Harris found that American students making attributions for speeches made by other students tended to make more correspondent inferences for freely chosen socially unpopular positions, such as freely choosing to make a speech in support of Cuba's president at the time, Fidel Castro. Another experiment, Jones and Davis and Jurgen found that participants made more correspondent inferences for out of role behavior, such as friendly outer directed behavior by someone who was applying for an astronaut job, in which they required attributes that favor a quiet, reserved, inner directed person. Correspondent inference theory has some limitations and has declined in importance as an attribution theory. For instance, the theory holds that correspondent inferences depend significantly on the attribution of intentionality, yet unintentional behavior, example, careless behavior, can be a strong basis for correspondent inference. Example, that a person is a careless person. There is also a problem with the notion of non-common effects. Correspondent inference theory maintains that people assess the commonality of effects by comparing chosen and non-chosen actions, while research shows that people simply do not attend to non-occurring behaviors and so would not be able to compute the commonality of effects accurately. More generally, although we may make correct dispositional attributions in the light of situational factors, this is rather a deliberate process, whereas correspondent inferences themselves are relatively automatic. Dispositional or internal attributions provide us with information from which we can make predictions about a person's future behavior. We consider only behavior that is freely chosen and largely ignore the ones that were forced upon the individual. We pay careful attention to the actions that show non-common effects, that is, the causal factor could be specific and other factors may not be involved. More attention is paid by us on actions of others which have low social desirability than to actions that are high on the dimension of social desirability. Therefore, according to the theory of correspondent inference, it is more likely concluded that the behavior of others reflects their stable traits when that behavior is freely chosen, has non-common effects and is low in social desirability. In sum, to conclude, according to the theory proposed by Jones and Davis, we are most likely to conclude that others' behavior reflects their stable traits, that is, we are likely to reach correspondent inferences about them when that behavior is freely chosen, yields distinctive non-common effects, and third is low in social desirability. I would now like to summarize the contents of today's lesson. We first began with understanding the practical need for attribution. We understood the meaning of the term attribution in social psychology. Then we started to study what are the most important theories of attribution in social psychology. We began with understanding Heider's common sense theory, and we also learnt about Jones and Davis correspondent inference theory. In the next lesson, we will be studying the remaining theories of attribution. Thank you.